Hey guys, Dr. Justin Marchegiani here. Today we're going to be talking about low hormones and insulin resistance and how that can drive weight gain. Lots of females I see that have hormones, whether they're either early perimenopause or going into menopause, the hormones are starting to drop. It's creating imbalances in their mood. Maybe they're having hot flashes. They're starting to have weight gain. We're going to dive into why some of these hormones are actually protective against insulin resistance and thus decreasing the chance of gaining weight, right? So, really important because I see this a lot in my practice. Women get older, their habits in their 20s and 30s are no longer effective enough to keep the weight off. Now, why is it? Well, first off, a lot of times as women are younger, they have higher metabolisms. Maybe they have more free time in their 20s. They haven't started families yet, or they have less obligations. So they're exercising more regularly. And now as we age, right, maybe the hormones are starting to drop, exercise it a little bit less. Maybe we've locked in some bad habits with eating, but now these hormones are starting to drop and now we become more insulin resistant. And this is going to be one of the key ways that we're starting to gain weight. So we're going to dive into that topic. Please smash that like button. Love to see your comments down below and we'll respond to them as well. So study came across my desk. I'll put it up on screen in just a minute, talking about insulin resistance in menopause. And so you can look at estrogen dominance / estrogen dropping over time, increasing insulin resistance. And so, what's insulin resistance? We have insulin, okay? This is the hormone, right? Put my finger here. Here's the receptor site. And so, what happens is insulin has to dock to the receptor site, and that allows glucose into the muscle to store it and or burn it. Over time, that glucose hits that muscle so much, now we need more of it. So instead of one finger, now we need two. Now we need three. And then now our muscles are full of glucose, now called glycogen. Our liver is full of glucose, now called glycogen. Where does that glucose go? It goes into our fat cells now. And so instead of one insulin, two, now we need three. So now more insulin equals more glucose converting to fat. And the higher our insulin is, guess what happens? Our ability to burn glucose for fuel goes down. So it's really important. Lower insulin in our body means we can take glucose and use it readily. More insulin in our body, especially when the receptor sites become resistant to insulin. Now instead of one, two, now we have three molecules of insulin. Now we need more. That makes it impossible for us to burn glucose. And now we're a storer of glucose, not a burner of glucose. So now we're a fat storer, not a glucose burner. So we want to switch it. We want to be a fat burner and not a glucose or glucose store or glucose burner, if you will. So one little study came across my desk. Let me pull it up here for you guys to take a look at. See if I can zoom in here on this thing. You guys can see it. All right, here we go. Let me pull back on it a little bit. All right, cool thing here to note. So it talks about insulin resistance results in the peripheral tissue, including the adipose, that's your fat tissue, your skeletal muscle. It talks about insulin causing the ineffective uptake of glucose, so meaning it's not being fully uptake, it's actually being converted to fat. It talks about it can typically go to type 2 diabetes, but you could be in this pre-diabetes world where you're not quite in that diabetes land, so you don't get picked up by your primary or your endo. And even then, they just throw metformin at you or insulin anyway, or maybe they put you on Ozempic or a GLP-1, along with abdominal obesity. So how we know it's starting to happen as a female, your waist size starts to become greater than 35 inches, high blood pressure, high levels of triglycerides. I run lipid panels all the time on women and men. One of the first signs of insulin resistance is this triglyceride ratio over HDL starts to go above 2. So a 2 ratio would be triglycerides at 100, HDL at 50. So the trigs are twice the amount of the HDL. So you want to be under 2. And so in a perfect world, you're at 1 to 1. So my personal triglycerides and HDL are 50 and 50. So I'm about 1 to 1. And again, HDL goes up with good healthy fats. So if you're eating processed fats and excess junky processed carbohydrates, you're going to have this big imbalance of triglycerides to HDL. All right. So along with abdominal obesity, high triglycerides, low levels of HDL. Again, HDL helps recycle your cholesterol, and that increases insulin resistance, and that's called metabolic syndrome. Accumulating evidence shows that biological sex has a major influence on the development of cardiometabolic disturbances, with females being more protected than males when they have good hormones. This protection tends to be driven by the female sex hormones and tends to disappear with the onset of menopause, but can be reestablished with hormone therapies. So this is important because I see lots of women in their 20s and 30s with very low sex hormones too. So this is not just a menopause thing. This is the fact that we've beaten up our sex hormones. We've beaten up our adrenals. We have less DHEA. Maybe we start to have some of the not so good estrogens, right? So we have our 2, 4, and 16 estrogen metabolites. 4 and 16 aren't good. And so when we're breaking down estrogen, we break it down to 2, 4, and 16. 2 is good, but we need healthy levels of B12, folate, choline, N-acetylcysteine, diindolylmethane, sulforaphane, indole 3-carbinol, a lot of sulfur cruciferous compounds to take our estrogen and to funnel it more down the 2 pathway versus the 4 and 16. 4 and 16 can damage DNA, can cause cancer cells to grow. Not that helpful. So even with estrogen, we want to make sure that we can metabolize it down this good pathway, and we have to have good nutrients. If we have excess estrogen, that's also not good too. Now, we mainly get the bad excess estrogen from pesticides, from plastics, from mold toxins. So those have their own whole host of side effects. Those aren't going to provide the benefits we're talking about here. We're talking about supporting your own hormonal system to make bioidentical hormones, bioidentical estrogen. And also we want to make sure it's in conjunction with progesterone. This study's not talking about it, but I can guarantee you we need healthy levels of progesterone there as well, because progesterone dropping also has studies correlating with low insulin sensitivity, or I should say low progesterone equal insulin resistance. So anything that drives insulin resistance is not going to be a good thing. You can go check out Gary Taubes' new book talking about the case for diabetes. He talks all about the history of insulin and diabetes and how it's just the number one driver of impacting a lot of our sex hormones. With men, high levels of insulin drive aromatase, which causes more estrogen. With women, it's the opposite. Unless you're PCOS, it tends to drive estrogen to testosterone, where men it goes testosterone to estrogens. We have this big little switch in the hormonal world. So really important here. So let me just kind of go back to my outline that I have for you all, and we'll go into it in a second. We're going to switch here. Okay. Got a little overview for you guys. All right. So first thing I wanted to show you guys here out of the gate. So insulin resistance, right? Cells do not respond to insulin. This leads to diabetes, but you can be in this no man's land where you're not at that 126 mg per dl blood sugar. That's the diagnosis of diabetes threshold. We could be in this much 105, 110. I don't like the conventional assessment for diabetes. I really don't. That's why I like to do what's called functional glucose tolerance testing. That is, I find it to be so much better to assess what's going on. So I really like to look at that when we're testing these things, right? And so with functional glucose tolerance, we're going to look at your meal, fasting. We'll get a blood sugar meter. Normally I have mine over here, but I let my wife, I got it. My wife was borrowing it the other day, but here it is right here. So we'll take a blood sugar reading before a meal. I'll do it with you guys live. I love the Keto Mojo. All right, my favorite one, justinhealth.com/ketomojo.com. Or sorry, justinhealth.com/ketomojo. I'll put the link down below. It's the reason why it's so good is it links Bluetooth wise to your phone, and then you have all the graph readings. So you don't have to worry about remembering them or writing them down. I used to have a spreadsheet and I used to plug them all in. And when this guy came out and I could graph it, it was amazing. It was automatic. So you get your blood sugar reader, just rip it in half. Put the little circle end here right into the meter like so. Okay, and then now you just get a little blood sample on the side of your finger. Ideally, use the outside of your pinky. Just a little bit of blood, just like that. That's it. Easy, painless. There we go. Just enough. 95. And so I ate my lunch about a little over 2.5 hours ago. So we want to be below 100 when you eat a meal, below 120 within hour 1, below 100 ideally in hour 2, definitely in hour 3. So I'm about below 100 in hour 2. That's really important. That tells you if the carbohydrate is too much for you. And also having healthy levels of protein and fat can time release that glucose too. So it's very helpful. Gives you a good reading. The higher your blood sugar goes and the longer it stays up, the more insulin you're making. So the readings on this aren't telling you insulin directly. It's giving you an indirect measurement that you're not overly secreting insulin. Now, as a woman, very helpful. As a man, same thing, right? Because high levels of insulin are the major thing that will mess up almost anyone's hormones. So it's very important to have some diagnostic criteria. So fasting before you eat a meal, below 100. Hour one, we want to be below 120, definitely 140, but ideally below 120. Hour two, we want to be below 100. Hour three, definitely below 100. And so that guy is a nice way to test that and assess that. All right, let me go back to my outline here. Okay. All right, let's make sense of it here for you guys. All right, so cells don't respond to insulin. This can lead to diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. Again, estrogen is protective role. It improves insulin sensitivity. Very important. So if you're menopausal, we want to work on estrogen. If you're cycling, we want to look more at DHEA if you're cycling. We don't want to add extra estrogen in if you're cycling. We may even use certain herbs that work on the upstream signaling from the pituitary, FSH and LH to the ovary. So we may do certain things like that. We may give herbs that work on the receptor sites, but we're definitely looking at DHEA sulfate in cycling women. And in menopausal women, now there's no longer a cycle. We may want to look deeper at providing extra estrogen, maybe more focus on estriol and also on DHEA as well. Again, fat distribution is a big deal. So because as we get older, as a woman, you're going to have less hormones coming in. And so this makes you more insulin resistant. So the habits that you had in your 20s, eating wise or exercise wise, if you don't quite have that same latitude and flexibility, so you're going to have to get tighter with those. They may not cut it in your 30s and 40s. So you may have to be more tighter with your exercise. You may have to add in more interval training to bump up growth hormone. You may have to be more on top of walking or resistance training. Maybe, doing something like pickleball or tennis, doing a sport that gives you a little bit of cardio and just being on top of that and then looking at your carbohydrates and just seeing, hey, if I'm more sedentary today, maybe I got to keep those carbohydrates down, use a blood sugar meter like the one I'm suggesting to kind of track things and make it more objective and not just subjective. That's helpful. Now, again, the organs that produce your hormones, right? You have the pancreas is producing insulin. That's your beta cells. You also have your alpha cells, which are from glucagon, and that's going to produce insulin. And it's going to produce blood sugar as well. So protein will stimulate that. The protein that you typically get from glucagon in your pancreas is going to be far less than your insulin. And so can you get some protein? Can the protein stimulate blood glucose? Yeah, usually about 75% less. And so healthy proteins, 75% less. And if you have fat with it, you'll get even less than that. The fat tissue reduces visceral fat. It improves metabolism. So again, estrogen can actually make your tissues more fat too. But when you have low estrogen, it's going to cause you to have even more fat tissue because fat gets locked away in fat tissue. Ideally, we want to be able to use that fat tissue for fuel at some point. When your insulin levels are too high, that fat gets locked away and you cannot touch it. So it's really important. If we want to be able to tap into this fat tissue, we have to lower our insulin. All right. And then the visceral fat, this is more of the fat around the organ. So we have like fat and then we have organ fat. And so organ fat is really important because estrogen decreases the organ fat. That's the most cardiovascular damaging. Okay. So fat tissue in general, harder to metabolize with high insulin. Estrogen protects the visceral fat by reducing it. And then your muscle, we have increased glucose uptake. That's the GLUT4. These are the little receptor sites on the muscle. And so if you do like 10, 15 air squats for a meal, you start to stick out those little GLUT4s. They pull in glucose. That's why after a meal, if your blood sugar is too high, a 5-10 minute walk can lower your glucose. Doing 15 air squats can lower it. Banging out some burpees or some push-ups or some jumping jacks, for 20 or 30 seconds for a meal can increase that GLUT4, which will help you process the carbs. And again, in the heart, estrogen also helps with the heart. It prevents diabetic cardiomyopathy. That's your your bigger left ventricle that gets weaker as well, and it enhances the nitric oxide that improves circulation. Nitric oxide is your natural vasodilator. Again, endothelial synthase in the blood vessels make it, and too much fructose, especially high fructose corn syrup, drop it. So women are more protected until menopause. Now, again, most women I see, I test their hormones, they're dropping even in their 20s and 30s, and they may be getting a lot of bad estrogens. And so this can not necessarily be true if your diet's kind of crummy. And again, as you move closer to menopause, it's not like your menopause, boom, it's a progression. It's gradual. So it's not snap your fingers and it happens. And again, dialing in your hormones is key. So we may add in bioidentical if you're at menopausal age. If you're perimenopausal, we're going to use more herbs. We're going to look at DHEA. We're going to work on the HPA-G axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, gonadal axis. And more importantly, hormones go awry with insulin problems. So if we can get the insulin dialed in, that can save so many women, right? Especially women who are PCOS. They maybe have too much androgens that screws up their prolactin. That can throw things off too. So we really want to be on top of the hormones. It can really save us. We would also want to be careful of the xenoestrogens, the estrogens in the environment. Those are not good. Those are not going to help us. So estrogens from pesticides, from plastics, from mold, from hormones in conventional meats, not good. All right, definitely not good out of the gates. So again, this is Dr. J here. If you enjoyed today's video and you want to dive in, you want to look at getting your hormones tested and look at that and make sure you're following all the diet and lifestyle strategies that are key foundationals, there'll be a link down below if you want to reach out to my staff and team. We see patients worldwide on the functional medicine, telemedicine side. So we're there for you. And any questions, let me know. Put it in the comments. But again, if you're menopausal or moving in that direction, or your hormones have been dropping over the last decade or so, you want to get your hormones looked at. And again, we look at cycling women and menopausal women differently, different ways to approach it. It's not the same thing. And we have to look at the insulin resistance component. So any questions down below and links down below if you want to reach out. All right, guys, have an awesome day. Take care. Bye.